Hello, everyone. I'm Grigoryan, and I work at Walmart Labs. And at my time at Walmart Labs, I had the opportunity to lead or participate in multiple technology transformations. And technology transformations range from purely front-end migrations to React and Node and Redux from Java. They range also to purely back-end changes to help scale the business, to help scale the technology for the business, and that can partake in technology changes that are purely back-end focused. And I even got to participate in models where we build and enable technology like React Native, and it's then up to the different teams to adopt and use it if they prefer. All in all, in my years of experience, I probably went through a dozen or more different tech transformations or deprecations or migrations that are probably a quarter to like a year long, really hefty projects. And as part of that, I started noticing a trend of what are the risks for such projects and what types of risks are there, and started framing it in a different way. And so I'm hoping that everyone can walk away from this talk, no matter what your level of participation is in a transformation, on a new way of looking at it. And so the way I started framing the conversation of technology transformations was really in three key categories. One is, who's the originator? What is the origin of the change? Is it the CEO, or is it the engineers, somewhere in between? I think that makes a big difference. The second is around what is the structure of the team itself that will be making the change, as that has a lot of explicit impacts on the project. And the third is a list of enablers to help mitigate the general problems that are faced when moving forward with technology transformation. And there's actually a fourth, which is the scope of the work in regards to, are you doing a big bang change? Is the change actually going to be incremental? But I'm not going to cover that because I think most of that is relatively common sense. And instead, there's one other piece that I'm not going to cover, and that is what happens when the organization as a whole is aligned to this change. I think that's projects that have a lot of wind in their sails, and so I'm not going to cover where from the CEO to the engineer, everyone agrees that we're going to do this. I think there's a lot of positivity in that, and they probably don't need help. And so going down to the framing, what is the origin of the change? And so let's take a hypothetical example for a top-down use case. And the reason I ask on where it originated from is to understand, is this a top-down project or is it bottoms-up? As they have inherently different risks. Now, if we take a hypothetical example for top-down, let's say your organization has bought out other companies and you're trying to, and the CEO says, let's converge services so we remove duplication. That's a top-down driven project. And obviously those projects have high organizational inertia, just out of the fact that it will be discussed in different leadership meetings, project management's all over you, right? There's product people thinking about it, and so there's a high organizational inertia. But the interesting trend that I see is projects that are top-down have a much higher chance of exits. And I believe that's from what I consider vertical tension. So in this hypothetical example, you might have pockets of teams that don't want to work on that technology, or they're unsure about what their career path is going to look like. Or they might not just agree with the business alignment. And so when considering top-down projects, the first thing I really think about is how is this going to impact the engineers that disagree? And how do we approach that? Then now looking on the bottoms-up situation, and for example, that could be you convert one of your apps to Node that was previously something else while the rest of the company is working on Java or something of that nature. Now these projects are generally smaller in scale because it's the team that took it on, that they had a lot of autonomy. They're generally successful in terms of converting that project because it's small and it's encapsulated. But it doesn't really change the organization in any way. So let's talk about bottoms-up projects that change the organization. that make a cultural impact. Because as part of that team, converted your system to something else entirely, you want to get the rest of the company on board. You want to talk about it to people and get them excited on what you're working on. So with that kind of theme in mind, the tension that I see is more horizontal, where other teams would look at this team making the change and wonder, how do they have time to do this? Why do they get the autonomy to make these changes? And instead, the conversations are kind of in pockets amongst teams. But that alone is not what I noticed when I see a brick wall kind of being hit. Generally, when a team kind of changes their own system, I see that there's really no adoption. And they end up being viewed as either renegades or like cowboys, or it's just this one team that's doing their thing because they're really passionate about this one piece of technology. And they don't have a large impact. And at Walmart Labs, we've kind of had a semi-grassroots type effort, specifically with React Native, where leadership ended up allowing us to invest in it, but it's up to the teams to adopt it. And in my previous companies, I also kind of seen this model. And I think the two key things to enable this model is that the team that's building and the first team that builds out kind of the product into this new technology have to become informal or formal platform team members. They have to switch to a very platform focus. Whatever they build has to become generic. Whatever they build has to be operationalized. You do not want the product teams to be thinking about how do I connect this to infra and A/B test it and build it and deploy it. And along with that, the team has to fundamentally become evangelists. They have to go out and talk to different people, connect over lunches, and be with the teams when they talk to leadership around approaching this new change. And the people that I've seen are generally super passionate and are able to convince their own kind of little group to switch to the technology. They generally falter on convincing others to do the same. And I think that's because they don't have an external focus of evangelism and acting like a platform. So let's kind of continue this top-down example that we have this organization, we're going to converge multiple services. What ends up happening is these projects end up taking a bunch of time. They're going to take a lot of people. And the first instinct that I see in most companies is it's going to take how long? It's going to take, how many people? And we cannot sustain as a business with that much investment. Our competitors are moving, and the amount of investment that it takes to make this change is too great. So let's invest and double the budget and stand up a parallel team. And I've seen this in multiple kind of companies where the team ends up growing 2x in size, and the thinking being, well, we'll just hire all these new people, and they'll build kind of this new system, or they're gonna work on the convergence of these systems, or they're gonna deprecate, or they kind of go the other way where they say, well, this brand new team, they're gonna work on the old stuff, or there's a mix of half-half. And I think that's actually a very common scenario that happens. In almost every company that I work with, I've actually seen this happen, and it's a very dangerous approach, because you fundamentally perverse incentives at a team level. You create two separate parallel tracks that are going to compete. You are setting up your teams and the organizations within them to fundamentally compete because they're working on different systems, and one's building features while the other one's trying to catch up. There's no sharing, and it ends up creating resentment. And there's also, at a personal level, career concerns that end up getting raised. Right? So when you hear about a transformation project, if you're the engineer and you don't feel really great about it, I see like a lot of the articulation is around, I have concerns about what this means for me. After we're done, what's going to happen with my team? Am I going to be, if I'm working on the kind of the system that's going to be deprecated, am I going to be appreciated in the same way that the team that's building the new system is going to be appreciated? And so kind of with those things in mind, my big takeaway is actually technology change is just is as much about the people as it is about technology, if not more so. The greater chance of success is getting people aligned and involved and having a sense of safety. And so now whenever I look at technology projects, and if I'm part of the genesis of it, my frame of mind is, how's this going to affect the people? Because that's going to really correlate to success. And so how do we ensure that we're focusing kind of on the people, and what are the enablers for the technology projects to really become successful? And so I bucketed those into kind of 3 categories that every project that I work towards, I try to encapsulate these kind of 3 areas. The lens of people and who's going to be working on it, and how do we make them feel. The what is the scope, and thirdly is around kind of process. Now, starting with the who, because I think that's the most important, you want to bring everyone along. So even if, as an engineer that's working on this transformation, you have to keep the lens of, I want to bring my partners along. That could mean the marketing team and sales team and business folks. It could mean other engineers. But you want to communicate far and wide, cast the net, to get everyone to understand the what, the how, the why, the when, and what does success look like. And as part of that, discussions that I see not happening are around what happens after the migration. After this change, what happens to me as an individual? What happens to my team? And I feel like most of the changes and projects that we kind of go through that are going to change how we work, we don't really think about the post-end state. And I think those conversations are extremely vital to have. And if your management doesn't initiate those conversations, you definitely should. And so that's kind of how we try to, I try to think about, how do we bring people along? And if we have the lens of, let's say, top down or bottoms up, that's how we put the thinking around, do we need evangelists and we need to work more as a platform versus am I going to have groups of people that are possibly unhappy? And how do we work through that? And how do we get together and go after this same common goal? And is there a better way to go about this? And then the second kind of pillar is around scope. And I think this is a key part because a lot of projects that I see fail do not have a very clear defined scope. I've kind of been through projects where the system that we're going to deprecate is so old and there's no one that really knows it completely. And if you're part of that project, you're going to miss your timelines, right? No matter what, I can almost guarantee that if you do not understand the current system and you're going to try to replace it, you will miss timelines, whatever they kind of may be. And so I think understanding parity is extremely important. Understanding your success criteria and what is it that you're going after. And it's amazing how many times that's actually not tangible, or it's so high level where it doesn't really matter. So you as engineers or managers or leaders, you have to know what you're going after, and you have to make sure that's concrete and clear to enable success of the project. And then kind of how we talked about the parallel teams with building features in this hypothetical example, they're going to continue building features on the old system. Ideally, you don't have parallel teams. The same team that owns the system is going to continue building it, and they're going to own the outcomes of both. That way their incentives are aligned. But let's say we have parallel teams and we can't go down the route of no new features. At that point, I think it's very important to have set goalposts. You want goalposts that do not move. That way your success criteria is locked down, what you're changing is locked down, and you can hit that goalpost, and then the team that's kind of the parallel team has to stop working, and they have to kind of join up the original group. And that's the only way I've seen parallel teams successful, is that after a first goalpost is hit, by the time it's hit, the team has already moved forward on the parallel system. They have to stop working and kind of come together and align to one team and realign incentives. And then from a process perspective, and I see this being missed, especially kind of with smaller organizations, is the thinking of A/B testing. I've never been on a project where we did a massive transformation and it launched and there's like unicorns and it's glorious and everyone's happy, we hit our metrics, we did what we thought. Never has worked out for me. It always took a few months, depending on the scale and the scope, of A/B testing, and our conversion might be down by 3% or 5%, but that makes a massive impact to us as a business, and we have to figure out how do we get this 5% and what are our users doing. And so I think that's why when we plan projects, and if you're a participator in it, you have to ensure that dev complete is not done. going to prod is actually just the beginning. And you have to plan for time to do A/B testing, and you have to build in great analytics and great routing to kind of work with the analytics in place. And that's kind of, or else you're going to extend the time period of post-launch. And so I think it's through these enablers that we can help really mitigate and ensure, or at least increase the chance of success for transformation projects. And then the last kind of learning that I had, and it's relatively recent, it's only been in the past couple of years, and I've actually thought more and more about it, and I felt more and more strongly about it. That's a boat that carries other boats, by the way. I thought it was a cool idea for platform teams. So what I started really thinking about is platform teams, and there might be some bias because I work on platform, but product as well, so it's not full bias. So if we look at platform teams, I think it's really important to have a team that's either formal or informal that focuses on operationalizing whatever the technology or the stack is. That way, product teams can fully work on the product features, and they don't worry about scale and connecting to infra or scaling this out to other teams. And I've seen it work where you don't have kind of a formal platform team. But I feel that there is a lot of power to make the investment and have people, even if you're in a team and you don't have it formally, to set aside a few individuals that will only focus on what happens when we're live and what happens when we want to grow this and scale this out. And so those are kind of the lenses that I take and the way I frame technology transformations as I move forward in my career. So thank you, everyone, and I wish you the best in your current or future tech changes and transformations. Thank you.